Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs, and all of you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Once again, I am your host, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your master of fun and wonder, your archduke of Banterbury, your sci-fi sommelier, your master of fun and wonder, and of course your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you, robcasting at you from the Robservatory. This is, of course, Robservations, the show about something. Robservations, episode number 364. Wow. Will you still love me? Will you still need me when I've done 364 episodes? My God. Boy, we do live in a shifting landscape today, don't we? I never know what's going to happen. I get off these chats and I don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. Lots of things are happening, ladies and gentlemen. Lots of things. And it's hard to keep up, to be quite frank. I don't know how to keep up. But with you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, you keep me, I try and stay abreast. I've tried to stay abreast since I was, about 13? But you keep me on the pulse. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And while I want everyone to know, I feel the need to say this, I understand a lot of things are happening in the world. They're happening very quickly. Not all of them great. Not all of them even good. But this show deals with what imagination connoisseurs are dealing with. And just because the rest of the world seems to be undergoing a tsunami of craziness doesn't mean we still can't talk about what we love. Movies, movie news, science fiction, fantasy, and horror in all of its forms. So that's what you are doing here. That's what I'm doing here. Let's bring a little joy into our lives, even when it's hard to do so. And I don't know if this is going to bring joy into anyone's life, but, ladies and gentlemen, breaking news from the time I was on the John Campy show, literally breaking news from mere moments ago, about an hour ago. Yes, Disney pushes back the release of Black Widow. Black Widow is gone, and amid coronavirus concerns. Now remember, Black Widow is not gone forever. It's indefinitely postponed. Let's read what Mia Gallupo says, what she said at 10:07 a.m., less than 2 hours ago. The Marvel movie was set to hit theaters in North America on May 1st. Disney is pushing the release of Marvel's standalone Black Widow amid growing concerns around the coronavirus. The movie, which was set to hit theaters in North America on May 1st, has been pushed to an undetermined future date. It is the long-awaited standalone on Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow superhero that also stars Florence Pugh and Rachel Weisz. Disney also pushed back the releases of Searchlight Pictures' The Personal History of David Copperfield, starring Dev Patel, and originally set for May 8th, and 20th Century's Amy Adams star The Woman in the Window, originally set for my birthday, May 15th. From the calendar, future dates are to be determined. Movie theaters are rapidly closing across the United States, especially in areas where cases of COVID-19 are proliferating. On Monday, Regal Cinemas and AMC Theaters, two of the nation's biggest theater chains alongside Cinemark, said all of their theaters will shut indefinitely. AMC said the closure could be between 6 to 12 weeks, severely impacting the film business and the box office. Black Widow is the latest studio release to be pushed due to the coronavirus pandemic. Universal moved the 9th Fast and Furious film from May of this year to April 2020, while Paramount delayed the release of A Quiet Place Part 2 just 8 days before its scheduled release, as well as the Issa Rae starring comedy The Lovebirds and Blue Story. Disney still has Artemis Fowl scheduled for May 29th and Pixar's Soul for June 19th. Where those movies are supposed to play, we don't know. So that is where we are at. Now, following this up is a response to the theater shutdown. NATO, the National Association of Theater Owners, put out this response. Again, this was reported at 10:45 a.m. this morning in Deadline. So here we go with this. The National Association of Theaters has officially responded to the current shutdowns of U.S. exhibition amid the coronavirus climate, and also had something to say about the window bursting that's currently going on with titles without mentioning Universal by name, as I reported yesterday. Breaking news literally right before I went on the show. Universal has decided to release the new Trolls film on VOD. They are releasing almost immediately The Invisible Man and Blumhouse's The Hunt, which is unprecedented, breaking theatrical windows. So that's what they mean. In sum, NATO doesn't expect either major studios to follow Universal's cues in making future event movies day and date in the home and on the big screen. Although there has been speculation in the media that the temporary closure of theaters will lead to accelerated or exclusive releases of theatrical titles to home streaming, such speculation ignores the underlying financial logic of studio investment in theatrical titles. That is very, very true. To avoid catastrophic losses to the studio, these titles must have the fullest possible theatrical release around the world. While one or two releases may forego theatrical release, it is our understanding from discussions with distributors that the vast majority of deferred releases will be rescheduled for theatrical release as life returns to normal, said NATO today. While I hear, this would be the author, most exhibitors completely understood Universal's decision to make their current theatrical releases Invisible Man, The Hunt, and Focus Features Emma available to rent in the home this Friday for a 48-hour period due to the nation's movie theater system shutdown, I also hear that many theater owners were put off by Universal's bold move to put DreamWorks Animation Trolls World Tour in-home over the Easter weekend on April 10th. And whatever cinemas are open at that time. As the sequel to a $347 million global grossing title, why rob theater owners of that money? For Universal, it's a financial decision. Trolls World Tour cost a heck of a lot of money, and they need to start making that back. But according to NATO, nothing is richer in regards to a movie's downstream revenues than a theatrical window system. Now 90 days between screen and home. And while we can estimate how much the remainder of March, April, and May domestic box office is set to lose, at least $2 billion per deadline calculations, for NATO and others, that's deferred money into another box office quarter, not lost money, as the Exhibition Trade Org projects. People will return to movie theaters because that is who people are, and it will be at a time when there's even more robust titles on the marquee. Below is NATO's statement, which I will read. With the pandemic coronavirus outbreak, the world is facing a difficult and trying time as the virus takes hold in different regions at different times and in varying degrees of severity. People and public health officials are grappling with decisions about when to close public-facing businesses and when to restrict personal activity. As with other businesses that serve large groups of people, movie theaters have faced voluntarily and mandated restrictions and closures. The majority of movie theaters have now closed. This industry will continue to meet its responsibilities to the public and will abide by public health mandates. Our partners in the movie distribution have postponed major new releases in response to the coronavirus situation. I don't know where I was. In markets around the world, other titles beyond the immediate horizon have not changed their release dates. Although there has been speculation in the media that the temporary closure of theaters will lead to accelerated or exclusive releases of theatrical titles to home streaming, such speculation ignores the underlying financial logic of studio investment in theatrical titles. To avoid catastrophic losses to the studios, these titles must have the fullest possible theatrical release around the world. While one or two releases may forego theatrical release, it is our understanding from discussions with distributors that the vast majority of deferred releases will be rescheduled for theatrical release as life returns to normal. And then, let me finish. While movie theaters will suffer some financial harm in the near term and many of their 150,000 employees will face personal hardship when this crisis passes and people return to their hardwired social nature, movie theaters will be there for them as they have always been, with a full slate of movies far into the future. So, as we've seen in the last couple days, movie theaters are entirely shut down. Universal, they broke the 90-day agreement they had with NATO, and they're going to make The Hunt and Invisible Man available, and Trolls is going to world premiere on VOD. So there's a lot of amazing changes happening in the entertainment business, the movie business specifically, very, very quickly. And perhaps these changes were inevitable, and they were indeed coming down the pike. It's just now the hand was forced. And it's, to me, look, like NATO says, people like going to the movies. Nobody wants movie theaters to go away. I've waxed rhapsodic about movie theaters for quite some time, how I've often spoken about how people from all walks of life go into movies. They all sit together in a room. Doesn't matter what their differences are. And when the lights go down, everyone's there to hear and experience and see and feel, most importantly, feel a great story. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. People love movies. We all love movies. But right now, in order to stop the spread of this virus, and remember, the thing that people I think are forgetting, you might not ever get symptoms. You might not ever get sick, but you don't know, because especially in the United States, we don't know where the virus is because there's not enough testing kits to ascertain who is symptomatic, asymptomatic, who's a carrier and who's not. So there's no way to know. The only way you can really fight a disease is to go find it. We don't have ways right now in the country of finding the disease. So until that time, whether you're young or old, it does pain me greatly to see young people out there, hey, we're partying for St. Patrick's Day. Well, that doesn't mean you're not spreading the virus everywhere you go. I mean, you don't know. And I think really what this is teaching the world is, once again, we saw the rapid spread of this within months, less than months, in a few weeks, really. This virus has spread around the entire planet. There are thousands of people dying. And while, it might not be as dire as some other pandemics have been in the past, we don't know what's going to happen because it's really in the early days. We've seen what's going on in Italy, and their health system is being overwhelmed. And we're a little bit behind them, but the curve is pretty much still the same. And it's heartening to see everybody sort of take it as seriously as they are taking it, because basically you see in a way just how fragile our worldwide economies are, how our systems are being taxed, and maybe in a way I think a lot of good will come out of this situation. And it's always better when people are more aware of what's happening around them. And I do see that will be a byproduct of what we're seeing here. And I think the idea, we were talking about this on the John Campea show, The Invisible Man was a movie that was made for $7 million and grossed over $100 million already, which makes it hugely profitable. Is it going to make $1 billion? No. But on a $7 million spend, and if you include P&A, the conventional wisdom is a movie has to take in 3 times what it cost in order to break even. So after $21 million, Invisible Man was doing very, very well. Now, I find it interesting. By breaking that 3-month window, the 90-day window that NATO and the studios agreed upon, maybe they can make even more profit because they're rolling off. A lot of people haven't been able to see Invisible Man yet that may have wanted to see Invisible Man. And what is so terrific now is that it'll be available in the home. Sure, you're going to pay a premium price, but if you're waiting to take the kids or take your wife or whatever, it's leaving the theaters. The theaters are shut down. You can't go there anyway. So this is a way you're still building on the momentum, the word of mouth. People are still talking about how good Invisible Man is. People are talking about The Hunt. These movies are going to be right in your home. And I think in a way, maybe you'll be able to eke out even a few more dollars from these films. Both of these movies were Blumhouse movies. They didn't cost a lot. So I think it's a new evolution of the business. And we'll see. We'll see how it works. So, I mean, we're going to get data. There is all kind of data sets from this entire experience, whether they're financial markets, I'm sure the Center for Disease Control and the World Health Organization has, in a way, in terms of preparing ourselves for future outbreaks and how quickly they can descend upon us, we are getting invaluable data. And it's not to say that people aren't dying, but there is invaluable data in all walks of life being generated to help us cope and deal with these kinds of situations in the future. The movie business is no exception. I think it's quite good that what we see happening, the response has been swift. Maybe not as swift as we would have liked it in the United States. And I do think that if there were decisions that have been made over the last couple of years that hadn't been made, we might have been able to get out in front of it beforehand. And but again, woulda, shoulda, coulda. Monday morning quarterbacking is always it's something everybody can do, but what's in the past is the past. You have to constantly look at the future and see where we're gonna go. So, the one other thing though that bums me out is if movie theaters are indeed, I heard 12 weeks. I mean, 12 weeks, that's 3 months. And from now, you're, April, May, June, that's the predominantly most of the summer movie season. Of course, we still have July and August, but would they keep movies on the same dates? Let's say, best case scenario, movie theaters open by June. If they open by June, where does Black Widow go? Where do you put it? Do you do what they did with Fast and Furious 9 and open it a year later? Well, if you open it a year later with Marvel movies and their interconnectedness, does that mean that you have to wait to open Eternals? Or will they reschedule Black Widow and have a 1-2 punch at the theatrical box office with Black Widow and the Eternals opening? I mean, it's very interesting. Movies that we had, the Trolls World Tour was, well, let's see where we're at. Friday, March 20th, The Truth was supposed to open. Friday, March 27th, Saint Maud. This is not a complete list. These are just some movies that were going to open. April 10th, Charm City Kings was going to open. April 17th, Trolls World Tour. And Promising Young Woman. That's the new Carey Mulligan. Is it Carey Mulligan? I think it's, yeah. Mulligan? Carey Mulligan? It's not Carey Mulligan. Anyway, that looked good. Antebellum was going to open the 24th. Bad Trip was going to open the 24th of April. Obviously, Black Widow was going to open on May 1st along with Dreamhouse. May 8th, you have Covers and Run. May 15th, my birthday. Scoob was going to open, and The Spiral from the Book of Saw was going to open. The SpongeBob movie was on May 22nd. On May 29th, Artemis Fowl and Irresistible were going to open. June 5th, Wonder Woman 84. June 12th, Candyman, the Candyman remake. June 19th, Soul, the King of Staten Island, and Killionaire. The Lin-Manuel Miranda movie on June 26th, In the Heights was going to open, along with Top Gun Maverick. July 3rd, we had Free Guy and Minions opening. July 10th, Ghostbusters Afterlife. July 17th, Bob's Burgers, and of course the new Christopher Nolan movie, which I can't wait to see, Tenet. July 24th, Jungle Cruise, The French Dispatch, Come Play, and the 31st, Barb and a Star Go to Vista Del Mar, and of course Morbius, the Living Vampire. It's just called Morbius, they're not calling it Living Vampire. And that's what May, June, and July look like. There's a lot of money there, there's a lot of investment there, there's a lot of great movies. And who knows whether the studios are going to, will there be movie theaters to play these in? And then if there aren't, where do those movies that we're going to play go? It's hard to say. Everything is in a state of flux. We've never seen this before. I don't think that movie theater going is going to go away, but I don't think it's going to start right back up once these things happen. I mean, remember, it can't be stressed enough that obviously, the older you are, the more high risk you are. The younger you are, the more resilient to this infection you are, but that doesn't mean you can't spread it. You could be, every time, if you're infected and don't know, everywhere you go, you're just blowing the disease around for somebody else to pick up. That's why social distancing has become a thing. Because with lack of testing, which we don't have tests in this country, you just don't know. And going to movie theaters, even if you sit in an auditorium and you're 5 seats away from someone, you're still probably going to buy popcorn. I mean, think about it. Think about how that's all done. A lot of movie theaters now have those communal, you put your own butter on your popcorn, you get your own soda, and you go to these counters and everybody's doing their own thing. And I think that it's a great thing that they've closed the movie theaters. There's nothing they could do. There's really nothing they could do, and you can't blame anybody at all. But unfortunately, I mean, this might have wiped out the summer movie season, which is going to put a world of hurt. Again, I cannot stress enough. And I've told this story, I've talked about this on the show many, many times. Studios are not sitting on liquidity. They're not sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars of liquid cash that they can just dip into and make movies. They are borrowing this money. There's lines of credit that are extended to the Every movie is its own business. Every movie, you set up an LLC and you make the movie under the auspices of that LLC. And then when the movie's done, however they work it, what you do is you sell that business to the studio when it's done for however much money you want to do it for, $1, who knows, even though it's all the studio's money. But it's its own business. And there's a lot of borrowed money out there. So Hollywood has to pay that money back. And now you're talking about canceling the summer movie season, which is the most lucrative season other than the holidays, the most lucrative movie-going time of the year. And all of that income is being just completely cut off at the knees, which means those interest payments aren't going to get paid back when they're supposed to, which puts a world of hurt on everyone exponentially. It ripples out, has an effect on everyone. And boy, the Writers Guild, whether they're going to strike or not, that's the only leverage they have is we can shut the business down. Well, the business has been shut down and nobody likes it. Nobody wants to be in this situation, and it is not a good situation, but it is going to have ramifications for years. I mean, I don't think that the stock market will obviously bounce back because it hasn't been wrecked because of the subprime mortgage crisis. It's just been a shutdown of businesses, and they will bounce back. It's not like when they open the doors of Disneyland again, people are not going to go. They might not go. There might be some trepidation, but I really want to go to Galaxy's Edge, and as soon as they open it back up, I'm going to get in on the Rise of Resistance because I haven't seen it. I mean, I want to make sure, obviously, that we're not in sort of a pandemic state. We don't even know where we're at. Cases are going like this right now in the United States. We'll see, but Disneyland will one day open its doors again, just like movie theaters will one day open their doors again. The question is, will people be able to survive okay until they get there, or will their lives and jobs be wrecked? I mean, I saw Munchin today talking about we're just going to give people money. The government's going to send people checks, I guess. I mean, for me personally, Elizabeth and I, we're a 2-income household here, and we her business, she cuts hair. She has her own, even though she's going to Art Center, she had her own salon in downtown Pasadena that she moved when they raised her rent exorbitantly high. She brought her salon here, and she works out of the house. She has her own little salon in the sunroom. She has a whole list of clients. We rely on that income to make our monthly nut, and it's gone. People aren't coming over to get their hair cut, and that's a huge hit. So, like everyone else, we're feeling it. Our income has gone poof. Obviously, even YouTube, the money you make on YouTube and all that, people don't have disposable income to send you super chats or tips or whatever, and all of that is. I mean, I'm gonna have to start. I wanted to do this anyway, but making a lot more videos. I want to do the Robservatory off the shelf and just make videos for ad revenue. But I don't know. Maybe YouTube will say, hey, there's no more ad revenue. They're not going to allow ad revenue to generate any kind of sales. Now, my channel's small, that I don't make a lot of money in ad revenue, but still, that could be hugely problematic, and everybody's going to take a hit. But in the case of movies, it's going to be particularly rough going into the season. It couldn't have been at a worse time, and unfortunately, we need to do what we have to do. People have to stay safe first and foremost. Now, that brings me to let me jump into your questions now. And I saw that there was a pretty relevant question here that I wanted to deal with. Paul Gilmore said, with movies and TV shutting down, does that also include post-production? I would like to think it would only be those. I would like to think I'd only. Wait, you know what? I gotta put on my glasses. It's too far away. I'm too far away from the screen. Does that include post? I would think it'd only be those still in production, since post work can be done using social distancing. Your brilliant thoughts on this. Well, Paul, as you know, I am working with director Dave Parker as an example. We are both in post. We're working on our pieces for the Hills Run Red Blu-ray. Now, he also has a day job, and they were going to be able to, as you said, work from home. So it depends where you're at in post-production. Sound mixing usually requires more people if they're doing a final sound mix. But for the most part, editorial for shows that have already been shot can continue. Post-production can continue. And what's great is whether you're dealing with sound mixing or whether you're dealing with editorial, a lot of post can be done remotely nowadays, which is fantastic. Very happy about that, and I think it's terrific that we're able to do that. And yes, it's my plan to have my 2.5 hours of material delivered this week. I got some graphics work I was farming out. I have that back, and I'm going to start delivering finished pieces as I've had them approved. So, So post-production, I mean, I from where I'm sitting right here, I do everything. I do my 5.1 surround mixes. I do editorial. I do graphics. Everything I need to do, I do right here. So, yeah, it can continue on, and I don't need to see anyone. I can sequester myself away here in the Robservations. That's true of most people, but, when you're working with, if you're editing and you're working with a director, you're going to have to see certain amounts of people, and it depends, like, where you're at. I think movie post-production, usually people go into a facility to do it somewhere, but it can happen remotely. A lot of people are just bringing their computers home, and they can continue. I mean, producers can look at cuts. I mean, Dave Parker works on a ghost hunting show that he told me the other day they had 5 episodes due. The production on those episodes can, in fact, continue. And yes, post-production is lucky in that we can do those things. In the case of special features, I'm a one-man band, so I finish everything in my computer, and then I just send the finished file out. So that's very good. Willow sends in a tip and says, I just don't understand people that are hacking websites like Worldometer to post false data about the pandemic. It's not funny or clever. If those hackers catch the virus themselves, it'd be karma. We do live in a weird world. And, until someone has been directly affected by things, look, there's always going to be those people, as Michael Caine said, that just want to watch the world burn. And I think that's, it's antithetical to my way of thinking. I like the world we live in. I'm a futurist, but there's always going to be a bunch of assholes. And unfortunately, that is too bad. But I don't understand. I mean, when it comes, if your mother or your father or your grandparents or a brother or sister or somebody was sick with this virus, you would not want to be sending misinformation. And this thing is hitting everybody. I mean, it's hit the whole world. Anybody who has stock or 401ks, watching their wealth being diminished. A company like Disney, billions and trillions of dollars of wealth have been wiped out over the last week. It's not the time to be that way. I think that we have to sit down, and hopefully people are realizing that there's got to be fundamental respect, I think, paid. And, maybe in a way, the byproduct of this will get people to start thinking about the world they live in and just how interconnected we are. And think about it. With that kind of thinking, maybe things like global warming or the Pacific gyres with the plastic and these problems that we have on Earth can be surmounted by people banding together and making the hard choices. I mean, I've actually been pretty impressed with, again, what's gone on so quickly during this time. But I really don't understand why anybody would do something like that, especially when, it's a matter of life and death. It really is. Nerdy by Nature sent in a super chat and said, with the possibility of things in Black Widow setting up future MCU storylines, I think that could sway Disney one way or other on the release. Well, I think that's a possibility, but I also think that Disney is, they're going to do what they're going to do, whatever the theaters are going to do. I mean, obviously Disney wants Black Widow to come out because they've spent a lot of money on it, and they need to have that money rolling back into their coffers so they can pay for that film, and hopefully, these movies need to be profitable. I think it's smart because we saw last week with the box office, it was down to the lowest point in 22 years or something. And just because you have Black Widow, it's going to do half of the business if you opened it. There's still going to be people that would go. Hell, I would probably go. But why do that? Why you have a movie that can potentially, if it's another Captain Marvel, although because of the very nature of the character, I don't think it's going to make that much money. But It could potentially gross $1 billion. And you know where it's not going to gross $1 billion? On VOD and not in the theater. So it's rough. It's rough. So I think, look, I don't know if it's a post-credit scene. I don't know how Black Widow possibly ties into the Eternals, but that's been part of the appeal of the MCU during the Infinity Saga, is how the movies do interconnect. And I am sure something to do with the Eternals shows up in Black Widow. And I honestly, maybe I mean, I don't know. I have no insight into this. Maybe they would just go ahead with the Eternals on keep that on the date and push Black Widow further back. Maybe, or maybe not. I mean, I really don't know. We are in uncharted territory that really no one's ever seen before, and it's fascinating to look at. Willow sent in another tip and says, to quote Robert Burns, the best laid schemes of mice and men often go awry and leave us naught but grief and pain for promised joy. Yeah, that's obviously one of the great classic quotes. It goes back to that sentiment that I always love to repeat, which is no battle plan ever survives contact with the enemy, because no matter how well you've planned something, you can never predict what's going to happen in real life when two sides clash. You never can. So it's a tough one, and who knows what's going to happen. Now, this is something a little different. I wanted to read this on the air because, I go back and forth with people. I go back and forth with people a lot, obviously, about Star Trek. And yesterday, I was on a Midnight's Edge After Dark podcast where I go on with Rob and Tom and Mecha Random and some other people, Script Doctor. And we just, we chew the fat, as it were. And we were talking about Picard, and there's somebody thoughtful that I've been going back and forth with about, wouldn't you know it, Star Trek Picard. And they sent me a DM on Twitter that I wanted to share that I thought was pretty good. And Shawn Pollan says, watched your round table on Midnight's Edge After Dark last night. Well, no one could accuse you of lacking passion, that's for sure. It would sure be nice if there were a single dissenting voice on the panel. If nothing else, just to mix it up. What is it they say of radio? That it makes for dry content when everyone agrees? The round table wasn't boring, but there's a vacuum of opposition and debate. What an echo chamber. No one capable or courageous enough to form and raise a single contrary thought. If you're willing to oblige me, I'd like to offer counters to some of your points. Not everyone's. You said they talk about how they had to reshoot stuff by episode 7 because the scripts didn't work. The story didn't hold together. Cite your sources, please. Director Hanel Culpepper discussed minor changes and additions to emphasize plot threads, and Jonathan Frakes discussed the addition of Riker, Troy, and Kestra to the narrative, but nowhere did it suggest scripts didn't work or the story didn't hold together. So how would you know this? Well, I will find that, but I know that I heard that myself, but I would say you've answered your own question. That Jonathan Frakes discussed the addition of Riker, Troy, and Kestra to the narrative? That's huge. I mean, that's massive. And I would also say that if you look at that narrative, that episode, the episode with Nepenthe, that episode accomplished nothing in the grand scheme of that narrative. But anyway, I'll keep going. I imagine the scripts would have worked and the story held together without reshoots. I have no problem with reshoots that polish and enhance story arcs. Yes, but as you just said and pointed out, adding Riker and Troy and Kestra to the narrative that's a monster addition. A monster addition to their narrative, and it didn't add anything to the narrative. The idea that reshoots signal major problems with story arcs versus minor enhancements is naive, but it sure fits a narrative. I don't think it fits any narrative. I think it fits the fact that they had to do an episode where they retooled it and they needed to do something to bring back the audience. That's why they added Riker, Troy, and Kestra. I mean, there's no quicker way to get Star Trek fans to get on your side than hit them with the feels. Then you quote me saying, I understand on a normal TV show that's not how it works. The writers are working while the show is in production. But on a miniseries like this or a 10-episode series, it's all one story. Why wouldn't these scripts be airtight, tight as a drum? And then he writes, good grief, I could write for hours about this. Art, my friend, is constantly being edited. Listen to any podcast of any writer, even classic works of fiction, discuss an earlier work, and 90% will tell you how they would do this or do that differently. Listen, when you're making television and you're in production, it doesn't work like that. You know, you really, there's pre-planning that goes into every episode, just like there's pre-planning that goes into movies. And when you're working on television, you really need to have your scripts as airtight as possible. This is something that is par for the course. I mean, shows like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are very intricately detailed and very well plotted because they have a tightly run writer's room with a showrunner that knows what's going on. The problem with Picard is, as with all modern Star Trek, is there has been no vision with the show from the very beginning. They constantly replace showrunners and things like that. This is something that's happening. This is why the show is the way it is. This is why you have Space Legolas fighting in the same corridor episode after episode. I mean, they spent time introducing a character like Elrond, or Elnor probably, pardon me. What was his purpose in the narrative? Was he supposed to serve Picard's journey somehow? Basically, Picard came, took him off planet, and then left him on a Borg cube? I can't believe that was something that was part of the original narrative. Unless, okay, maybe he's going to come back and when Seven of Nine shows up with her Borg cube and wrecks shop on the synth homeworld or whatever's going to happen. But I don't see that. I mean, the whole point of that character was supposed to inform Picard's journey, and then you leave him behind so he can no longer inform. He's been a complete waste of a character. And I would say, look, the evidence, you might like Picard, but you're not giving me evidence of the show itself. You're saying, well, other writers have done this. Art, my friend, is constantly being edited. It is, but not when you're making a television show on Picard's budget. You know, the whole point is to pre-plan and know what you're shooting. That's really it's really important. And on a show like this, where you're spending this kind of money, the show would have been much better if these scripts were already airtight. Then he goes on to say, listen to Nicholas Meyer's recent comments about what he'd change about The Undiscovered Country, which I consider a damn good film. This idea of having a perfect and immutable work of art that no creator wants to touch up is preposterous. I don't say that. What I am saying is that the medium of television, the way things are supposed to be produced when they're produced correctly, it's not rocket science. It's been happening for 70 years. And I say that the people that are producing modern Star Trek are not experienced enough producers and showrunners to be producing a show effectively, on time, on budget, with good storytelling. Because it's self-evident. Now what you're doing is like everyone else that comes after me and says, I provide you exactly why I dislike Picard. I give very specific examples, and I tell you why I don't like the show. And from a larger extent, I would say that that it's when I talk about the actual production that I'm not a part of, I mean, I can only see the results of that production. It's obvious to me. I mean, it's ironic that I'm producing special features for a movie that I developed, and I developed and shepherded it from being a $350,000 production all the way to being a studio production that we produced for millions of dollars. Now, I did that. I produced that movie. I went to Bulgaria. I went to a foreign country and was a producer working day to day on the production. I know how to do this. And I mean, that's all I can say is that, look, is there a reason why my career isn't bigger than it is? Sure, but that doesn't take away from what I have actually done. We finished that movie on time and on budget in a foreign country where we had some very interesting curveballs thrown our way. And I can tell you that Star Trek Picard, based on the scripts and based on what we're seeing, it's self-evident. You might like the show, and I don't want to take away from anybody liking the show, but if you're going to come after me, don't tell me what Nicholas Meyer is telling you about art and how, or Star Trek 6 could have been better. Sure, it could have. It could have been better because they could have had more time and more money. And they could have, Nicholas Meyer could have had more Control, but of course Leonard Nimoy came up with that story. So there's a lot of things that they have to deal with. And with Star Trek as well, Star Trek Picard, you've got an actor who wants certain things. It's not produced in an optimal fashion because of the very nature of what kind of a show it is. If your above statement is true, then all movie scripts would be airtight before entering production. Well, let me tell you, the best movie scripts usually are airtight. Are there examples of things like Gladiator that was written on the fly? They were writing that movie as they were making it? Sure. And it turns out that they're pretty good. But you know what? A lot of the best movies also did, in fact, have airtight scripts going into production. I'll give you an example. The Shawshank Redemption. They recorded Morgan Freeman's dialogue, his voiceover dialogue, before they started shooting, so they had it to play on set. The better off you are with your script, the more airtight your script is to begin with, the better your show or your movie is going to be. Because you have 100 different people working on different aspects of the film, and you want to make sure they're given the time and they're able to exercise their abilities to do what you want or do what the director wants. And it's always best to have a script that's ironclad before you go in there. If scripts for a 10-hour production should be airtight and require no adjustments, then surely scripts for an average hour and 20-minute film should be too, right? Fair? Yes. And then you ask, try Googling classic celebrated movies that required major reshoots. See if that's the case. I did. The first two articles that popped up listed, among others, The Exorcist, Back to the Future, E.T., Fatal Attraction, Jaws, Mad Max Fury Road, Apocalypse Now. Well, these things that you're citing, Back to the Future replaced its lead actor 2 weeks into production because it wasn't working. This was not a script issue. Mad Max Fury Road had all kinds of weather issues. They were going to make that movie for how many different places, and they didn't. Apocalypse Now, Martin Sheen had a heart attack during production. A typhoon destroyed the sets. When Marlon Brando showed up, he weighed a lot more than he was supposed to, and things were crazy. That script was being rewritten as they went along. There's also been 3 versions of that movie released. I would say that these things that you're citing are exceptions to the rule. But yeah, movies are always reshot. Movies are iterative. You can always go in and do these things. But that doesn't mean that when they went into them, the scripts weren't airtight. I mean, the reason these films got greenlit in the first place is, for the most part, the scripts were airtight. And The Exorcist was based on a best-selling novel. Back to the Future was a very airtight script. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. You talk about Jaws. I mean, they had huge problems shooting on the water. Production issues that nobody could have anticipated because of the way it was shot, the way it was done. So those aren't the examples that you're citing aren't really the kind of examples I'm talking about. And also, these are exceptions, not the rule. Why weren't their scripts absolutely airtight, tight as a drum before they ever went into production? They probably are, because the examples you're citing are not necessarily script issues. Apocalypse Now definitely had script issues. Mad Max was more of a storyboarded film. But the other movies, The Exorcist and Back to the Future, did not have production reshoots and problems because their scripts weren't airtight. So, yeah. And then I say, you bring up my quote, how are synths integrated into Federation society? Are they only working at Utopia Planitia shipyards? Are they serving on starships? And then you say to me, I honestly don't understand why this is a hang-up for you. How does whether synths were only working at Mars or throughout the Federation change this story? Well, I'll tell you how it changes this story. It changes this story because we're supposed to believe that there is an ancient race, or a race that's still out there, that believes that synths, artificial life, are going to rise up and destroy all humanity, or all humanoid life, or all non-synthetic life that's the warning that the Zhat Vash is given. Well, right now, where is that threat coming from? I would say that at the end of Battlestar Galactica, at the end of Daybreak, there's a montage that sets up how robotics have permeated our society. What happens before is going to happen again. Well, you can't establish a threat, synthetic life, without explaining what do they mean by that. at least in my mind, I mean, I don't understand. This story is all based on a synthetic uprising, which, by the way, didn't really happen. Because as we've learned from the show, it was the Romulans, it was the Zhat Vash who engineered this uprising in the first place. So it really wasn't the synths fighting for their rights to party. So I would say that the messages here are muddled at best. If you're telling me that the Zhat Vash doesn't believe in any kind of synthetic life form, first of all, if you have an alien race that drags 8 stars to surround a planet as a warning, first of all, why would they keep that a secret? The alien race that did this clearly didn't want us to be a secret. That's why they put 8 stars and put them into an impossible configuration around a planet. But anyway, I honestly don't understand why this is a hang-up for you. How does whether since we're only working at Mars or throughout the Federation change this story? Picard is going to oppose Starfleet's choice to protect Data's daughter regardless. Do we have to know everything now? Where is the room for stories and worlds to breathe and unfold? Where's the mystique? One of the things I've always loved about Star Trek is the slow building, unfolding of cultures and the universe. The Romulans reappear after decades, secretive and mysterious. The Dominion is mentioned in the briefest discussions between Quark and a traitor from the Gamma Quadrant. Half the fun is slowly unpacking the universe, and part of the fun of Picard for me is the slow reveal of an updated Alpha Quadrant. I'm content to learn more about to what extent synths were integrated into Federation society as we go. I don't need to know everything about the universe to enjoy what's happening with Picard. I've been watching Westworld on HBO. What the hell? Uh, that is crazy. Crazy what just happened. I can't even believe I'm still back on Bud Brigman, like in the abyss. Bud Brigman back on the air. Literally, the internet just quit. Just absolutely quit everything. All my things lost internet. I don't know what happened. It wasn't YouTube. It was literally the internet just winked out. It's kind of like the beginning of the alternative factor. I don't know where I was. I'm going to get back with this letter. Okay, let me start. I'm going to go back to where he was. Usually, your ideas for Trek storylines and arcs get a hell yes from me. And I'm not even saying that starting with the admonition wouldn't be interesting, but I wouldn't change Picard's premiere. We start with Picard's dream and Daj's escape from abduction. The focus is on persons, not quadrant. Picard is a character study first, a sci-fi adventure second. What I was saying is I don't think Picard is a character study. I think Picard, and that's what ultimately I think the greatest failing of Picard is that we don't know what does he really want. I mean, of course, he's been maybe writing books. We don't know much about his life. We didn't really get to see much about his life other than the fact that he's in this, he's at his vineyard, the Chateau Picard. We didn't even get enough character interaction with other people in Picard's life. Even in family, you see Picard interact with a number of people. He's even offered a job working underwater on Earth. And you realize, well, you don't really want that. I would say that the Picard series has not done a very good job establishing who Picard is on many different levels. For the show did start with questions. Maybe some like yourself would prefer the show start off with bigger, far-reaching questions that affect the entire Alpha Quadrant. What was the admonition? Why did these women kill themselves? What drove them mad? Instead, the questions are, who is Picard now? Who is this girl? Why is she being hunted? Who is hunting her? Why did the heroic Federation shrink from helping the Romulans? And then you quote me. You say that I said, which I did say this, I don't understand what the central problem is. That's what I said. Now, he steps in and says, may I endeavor to help? First of all, I'm wondering if it's not simplistic and reductive to try and reduce a show to a central problem. But here we go. Let's do some other series first to give framework. Take Battlestar Galactica. What's the central problem? Cylons are exterminating humans. Take Westworld. 4 episodes in, I'd say the central problem is sentient androids seek freedom. Okay, then reducing Picard to a central problem, I'd say android girl in danger. But that's not what the show should be about. It should be about Captain Picard, Admiral Picard, now Picard, who's now a civilian. The central problem should be Picard himself. The girl is just somebody that offered, that literally wandered onto his property, and they gave him this problem that they trumped up, that made the loosest connection to data possible. And she's a damsel in distress, and she has to go be rescued. But what does that have to do with Picard? Other than the fact we know Picard's a Starfleet captain and he does the right thing and it's an action adventure show, why does Picard feel the need to help her? Why not continue on as a civilian and help the Romulans that have been displaced over the last 14 years? Why, because of his connection to a comrade who died 20 years previously and some girl who has the most tenuous connection ever to him, that's what gets him off his ass? I don't buy it. I don't buy, from a storytelling standpoint and from what I know about living on the planet Earth with people, I don't know. Now, then as you unpacked, each problem becomes multifaceted. Yes, that's what great writing is. And I don't see a lot of evidence of great writing on this show. Now, you say that I quote, this is what you say I said, they keep talking about Daj and Soji's homeworld. Wait a minute, weren't they created by Bruce Maddox? Did they make the synths a homeworld? I'm lost. Good grief, Rob, take a breath. They're talking about Daj and Soji's homeworld the same way that TNG referred to Omicron Theta as Data's homeworld, not a world populated by Datas, just the world on which Data was born. They have not said that. You're making assumptions. As a matter of fact, everything that you're saying in these things is you're making assumptions. They're talking about homeworlds, having a homeworld at all. They've told us that Bruce Maddox was involved in the creation of these robots or these androids or human beings with positronic brains or whatever. We still don't know what those are, and I'll bet you by the end of the show it's not clearly defined either. But what I'm saying is now they're saying we're journeying to their homeworld. Well, how many of them are there? Did Bruce Maddox create all of them? I guess we're going to find out. But I think that these are things that we should know because they contradict one another. It won't be the world populated by synths, just the world on which Soji was created. Her home, just like Riker and Troy talked about Nepenthe being adopted as Thaddeus' homeworld in episode 7. I could be wrong. Well, if Thaddeus was born on Nepenthe, it is his homeworld. In which case I will message you again and confess to being wrong. I'll even highly criticize the writers for imagining Maddox could create enough synths to populate an entire planet in the short time that he had. But I don't think that's what we'll find. I want to go on, but I'll appreciate it if you read this far. To be clear, I love your analysis of Trek more than anyone's on the web. Well, I appreciate that. I'm grateful for your everyone's welcome, and it's good to like things inclusively on your channel. If you find my messages a nuisance, I can refrain. I just wish there was an alternate universe, Rob, arguing as passionate in favor of Star Trek Picard as you argue against. I'm sure he'd be as charming and welcoming as you. He'd just be right. Well, okay, first of all, Shawn, you pulled it out there at the end. But I want to appreciate, look, I think this is a great letter, and I appreciate you sending this stuff to me. But for me, look, I judge everything by the same standards. And those standards are, the way I see them, is a story well told? Now, I'm using myself as a litmus test. If it's well told, if I can recognize it as well told, I would say, okay, then it's good. It's pretty good. And I have experienced all kinds of stories in my life, not just Star Trek stories, but all kinds of stories in my life. And I do think that there's certain ways that stories are told, certain stories that are told well, and certain stories that are not told well. And within the framework of the Star Trek universe, we've seen androids and we've seen synthetic life, we've seen silicon-based life, we've seen all kinds of alien life. And there are questions that arise. Well, I would ask this, and I've been watching this show very carefully multiple times. I watch every episode multiple times. I still don't know, I do not understand by what they mean by synthetic life. I don't. What is synthetic life? Because Data is not alive. Data is an android. Androids are not synthetic life. Now, in this show, Soji and Daj appear to be humans. They have human bodies of flesh, but for some weird, inexplicable, somebody cloned a positronic neuron or whatever, which means to me, what they're trying to say is that somebody cloned a machine. It would be like saying, you're flesh and blood, but we cloned something that was in a calculator and made your brain. I don't buy this. I need to know exactly what is going on here. What is happening with these characters? And I would think that because the whole storyline is dealing with what synthetic life is, what does it mean, synthetic life revolting and suddenly destroying its creators. We've seen all that. We've seen it in Battlestar Galactica. I get it. I understand. But again, does synthetic life, couldn't there be, what if there's some kind of I just don't know what synthetic life means. Like I talked about yesterday, if you're a replicant in Blade Runner, you're organic. Your eyes are organic eyes. It's just people have been growing you and manufacturing, whether they're 3D printing your organs or however it is. These are beings of flesh and blood. We're physical, as Roy Batty says. It's just that they're manufactured. So the question is, if you have a biological entity, and replicants are a biological entity, the question is, do they have souls? Is their consciousness valid? I would say, indeed, it is. It doesn't matter if you're a biological creature, whether you were grown in a test tube, whether you were birthed, or whether you were built part by part, you're still a biological entity. You're still alive. So I want to know what in the way Picard is called, because we've never heard the term synths used in the Star Trek universe. So tell me what it is. I need to know. I think that's a very foundational element of this show. And I do think you have to know how synthetics are being used. Like in Aliens, we understand, I prefer, synthetic person? That's what Bishop says. We know that they're on various ships. We know that Bruce Maddox from Measure of a Man said, I want to put a data on every starship. Why would you need a data on every starship if you have holograms? And what are holograms but a manifestation of the ship's computer? I mean, if you have an android who has an electronic or a positronic brain, data can be turned off. Is that synthetic life? And if synthetic life can be turned off, why are synths a danger? Why not just turn them off? I just need to know. And here's the thing. The people that are defending Picard so passionately, you're always giving me examples that aren't in Picard, aren't in the show. I'm giving you very specific questions that I have about what they're setting up. I need to know these things, because if I don't get what story is being told. And if I don't understand the story being told, I fail to become engaged by it. You need to know the stakes. Star Trek at its core, if you watch the original series, basically the premise of the show was established in the teaser. You understood what the episode was about, and you were going to explore whatever that was. Anyway, I know people are sending in chats and things, and I've been going off on this on a long time. But I do appreciate that you sending that in. I love being called out on that. But I would ask these questions about any story. I think every story, what happens is you need to set up, I've often said that the Burnett axiom is never put your universe before your story, before your characters or your story. But your characters and your story also define the universe that your story takes place in. And every story, whether it's based on a historical event or whether it's a science fiction story or a horror story or whatever, every story creates its own universe unto itself. And it has to establish the rules. You have to understand as a reader or a viewer, you have to know what's going on in that universe in order for a story to work. You have to understand the rules because that helps you follow what's going on. I don't understand a lot of what's going on in Picard. I don't understand it. One of the things that we talked about last night on this Midnight's Edge podcast was if you just had a Borg cube. When we were talking about the fact that Patrick Stewart wanted to deal with the Trump presidency and Brexit and all that within this course of this storyline. Well, what if the whole thing had been about the Borg cube? That what do you do when you have the XBs, the reclaimed drones, are refugees from perhaps 1,000 different worlds? They might have. We've already seen in Star Trek that both Seven of Nine and Captain Picard, principal Star Trek characters, are in fact reclaimed Borg drones. People forget that Patrick Stewart was because he was Locutus, but he was the first. And once you saw him reclaimed, then the Borg drones, we know that they're innocent victims and they do things against their will. Picard led the Borg cube at the Battle of Wolf 359. It was responsible for the deaths. I mean, well, he wasn't responsible, but his Locutus persona certainly helped them. And the question is asked. I mean, you could do a whole show about what a Borg cube in the control of Romulans or whoever. You could do a whole series about that. I mean, suddenly you've got so many issues with all those reclaimed XBs. It wouldn't have been an action-adventure show, but you could have done an incredible 10-episode Star Trek series about what happens when suddenly you've got tens of thousands of Borg drones on a Borg cube that you're reclaiming, and what does all that mean? What are the rights issues? What happens to these people? You could have done a great series, and Picard, of course, would be the person who was one of the great experts in this, and that he was one of the first reclaimed drones, and if Hugh had reached out to him, and you could have just done a very different show and still deal with all these subject matter in a Star Trek context. Anyway, that's what we're talking about. So Chairman Mao, sorry, I've been kicked off the air today, and now I'm back in. Sorry, crazy. Chairman Mao sends in a tip and says, I disagree with NATO's optimistic appraisal of the situation, that all that money is merely deferred. They can't possibly make all that money back. People aren't making as much money. We've busted our wallets on toilet paper. Well, no, here's the thing. I do think you're right in terms of our economy is totally wrecked. Now, it's wrecked, but it's not irrevocably wrecked. It's not like the subprime mortgage crisis. A lot of the liquidity and all of the what's going on, everything that was wiped out, didn't go away because of bad loans. The stock market is plunging for different reasons, and once things are open for business, I think the economy is going to bounce back, assuming people like everyday folks can have money to spend. I mean, I know that, like I was explaining before, the economic impact in my own household is huge. Even YouTube revenue, is plunging, and it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen in the next couple of months. We're all going to be in a world of hurt. Everybody, no more. The entertainment business is trashed right now. Nobody's working, and when no one's working, it's not like there's some companies that are paying employers, or employers are paying employees for a couple weeks, but they can't do that indefinitely either. Nobody has huge reserves of cash where they can just pay their employees to get them through this difficult time. It's difficult all the way around, and people are in a world of hurt. You think about poor Disney. When I say poor Disney, I mean, I don't know what it's like to lose billions and billions and billions of dollars of my value. It's crazy. I worry about my mother. She lives off she has mutual funds and all of that. I mean, my mom's going to be 81 years old next month, and a lot of her money is based on her holdings and the things that she's had, that she's saved up, and the markets have a big effect on that. And what happens when suddenly, if she doesn't have any more money, it's going to be rough for a lot of people. So I think you're right that it's there's a lot more going on. There's a lot more going on about that. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know. It's crazy, but eventually we'll come back. I mean, as Anti-Entity said in Thunderdome, we will rebuild. Yes, we will, because we don't need another hero. We don't need to know the way home. All we want to know is what life is like beyond Thunderdome, right? Isn't that what we're saying? That's what I'm saying. Stubble McShave is here. Stubble McShave says, does Amazon borrow money for their movies and TV series in the same way as other studios? Is the studio segmented from the rest of the organization? They have huge coffers to pull from. This is a good question, and I'll flat out say I don't know. I don't know the answer. But I do know this. When you're working in a big organization, I can tell you that when I have worked at the studios, the money, and I worked in physical production. So I worked in physical production at Warner Brothers for a year for Bill Young, and then for a couple of years after that in various other places. But I was a management trainee for the senior vice president of physical production at Warner Brothers. And the way money is spent, it's very controlled. Money is coming from various places, and it all has to be accounted for. Now, again, Amazon is worth a lot of money, obviously, but they've got fulfillment centers, and each fulfillment center has to be run on its own. Like each fulfillment center, I would imagine, is like any other business. You have to keep track of every dollar that's spent. Money is coming, money is going. And so maybe Amazon does have a chest, a war chest where they can make things, but still, again, all of that money has to be accounted for, every last dollar. So I don't know. I don't know if Amazon still, though, even within Amazon, I don't know if they're borrowing, if Amazon has billions of dollars of money that they're just using for production. They probably could, I guess. But if there's one thing that I've learned in Hollywood, never use your own money to produce a movie. Never do it. I mean, look, if I had the money right now, I'd buy back Free Enterprise and take care of that. And if I won the lottery, if I won like $500 million in the lottery, I would absolutely set up a production fund, assuming that was my take home. If I had $500 million take home, I would do what Megan and David Ellison did. I'd set up a $500 million production fund. I'd probably carve out $50 million and set myself up for the rest of my life. Certainly get every hot toy figure I wanted and live in a nice house that had great display cases and a great home theater and a great edit bay like this and all that. But I would set up a production fund and use that own money and roll it in. But hopefully it would pay for itself. What you want is you'd want to make things that would eventually refill those coffers, and you'd eventually make a profit. I don't know, to be honest. I'd be curious to see how Amazon does it. But I would suspect they do it like the studios. They either have some kind of a credit line that would be guaranteed by Amazon itself, because that's just the way production is done. Otherwise, I mean, I guess I could just see that there'd be a little bit of a danger, but I guess if you don't have to borrow money, if Amazon extended themselves their own credit rating, but still each production is still going to be its own business. So again, I don't know exactly how that would shake out. It'd be interesting to see. I'd love to know. Swag Props sends in a tip and says, my fascination with Discovery and Picard is akin to driving by a horrific car accident. You want to look away because you know there'll be blood and mangled bodies, but at the same time you want to look because you know there'll be blood and mangled bodies. Well, Cal is, of course, Swag Props. Cal made this Rorschach's Journal, which I love. If you got to go to Cal's, if you haven't gone to Swag Props' Etsy store and look at, I just like the fact that there's somebody in the world that makes books, prop books from movies. I think that's the coolest thing ever. But that they're made so well. These things are so incredible. The detail, the weathering, everything. Go to Cal's Etsy store and go to Swak Props, SWAK Props, and check out his wares because they're amazing. I just love that we live in a world where I don't know what made Cal do it. One day I'd love to hear the story, Cal, of what made you decide, what was the first prop book that you made? I want to know. And you're so into it. Your books are so well done. I'd love to know. It's awesome. But here's the thing about I guess what I find so strange about both Picard and Discovery. Look, I get it. With Discovery, it was being produced by, and here's the thing, I guess part of the reason is I'm jaded because I saw and I know what Bryan Fuller was trying to do with the show. But a perfect example of that is I love the idea that Bryan Fuller had in Discovery of going back to Ralph McQuarrie's Enterprise design that he created for the Ken Adam, the production designer, was the production designer on Planet of the Titans. Now, for those of you who don't know, Planet of the Titans was a Star Trek movie that was being developed in the 70s, before Star Trek the Motion Picture, before Star Wars. Ken Adam was the production designer, and Ralph McQuarrie was the production illustrator, serving in much the same capacity as he did on Star Wars. And he created this, the Enterprise, the Discovery version of the Enterprise, sort of the triangular hull and that kind of thing. Well, as a matter of fact, I can do what John Campea did, and why don't I find that? If you get like the art of Star Trek, okay, here we go. Yeah. So, let's see if I can do this. Hold on. I'll just give me a moment, and I will go to screen capture here, and let's see, Ralph McQuarrie Enterprise. New screen capture, and I will put this on where I'm at, so I can tell you this. So, Ralph McQuarrie, Mr. Star Wars himself, obviously. Let's configure this. And let's see, hang on, hold please. And I'll put this down. And sorry, this is taking me a little while. But we'll try it. Doing this on the fly, I usually do this. I set this up beforehand. But let's do it now. Let's make it happen now. Let's see. There we go. Okay. I'm going to blow this up. I'm going to blow this puppy up so you can see it. Okay, here you go. This is the Ralph McQuarrie Enterprise. And this is what he designed for the Planet of the Titans film. They say 76, 77. But yeah. So that's what it looked like. That was there's a couple of examples there. So anyway, and they built study models of it that actually wound up in Star Trek The Next Generation and wound up in Battle Wolf 359. There was one of them. It was in Space Dock, the study model. And as a matter of fact, there's a picture of that here. Let's see. Can I move this around? Let's see if I can. Let me put the study model up so you can see them, those study models. Let's see, here it is. So this version of the Enterprise, these are okay. Here are the. I've changed it. So here, let me move that around. Those are the study models. One of the study models that was created, that actually Alec Peters of Axanar fame had in his office. So these were the versions of the Enterprise that were designed for Planet of the Titans. And that's where, of course, the Discovery was originally came from. So sorry for that. I just had to do that. So that was what Bryan Fuller was going for, and they were going, as I'm sure as they refined the Discovery, they were going to make it look more like with the low-slung nacelles, it had an Enterprise D vibe to it. But I don't even know where I was going. But Bryan Fuller was doing all of these things because he was delving into Star Trek history for the Discovery. But at some point, but from when he left to when we got what we got now, they got rid of the circular nacelles, and they moved away from the idea of even the costumes, and the character of Saru in Brian Fuller's version was very different than what we ended up getting. I've often talked about how there was a tardigrade character, Ephraim, which they reutilized that concept for a animated short trek. But Ephraim worked with Stamets in the engineering section. He was like Chewbacca to Stamets' Han Solo. And all of these things were happening. And to see where Discovery was taken after Fuller left, they really moved far away from, and like all modern Star Trek, they came in and they made it their own. They changed things, which was unfortunate. And there was again, let's make Star Trek our own, as opposed to work in the established parameters of what Star Trek already was. And I that's why I watch this show. I'm baffled. I'm baffled by modern Star Trek ultimately. And I don't know. I understand. Let's make it your own because that's what's lucrative. That's business. It ain't show friends. It's show business. I get it. So Swack, I understand. And Shawn Pollan's here. Shawn Pollan heard me read his message to me, which I appreciate. Shawn says, "Thanks for reading. Please don't see the letters coming after you. I love the channel, and I'm deeply grateful for how respectful you've been. I imagine us sitting in a shop having the most amiable conversation while disagreeing at every point." Look, I agree with you. I think that's great. And I by the way, don't ever stop sending me stuff like this. I have liked going back and forth with you. Because, like I said, if somebody challenges you, it makes you reassess your own beliefs and you learn how to explain them. It's always a good thing when somebody comes after you. Or not comes after you, but challenges your belief systems. And look, here's the thing. There are people, I freely admit that I look upon Star Trek differently than a lot of other people. A lot of other people sit down, like I have a friend, she's brilliant, very smart woman, and she watches all Star Trek as comfort food. She is not nearly as critical as I am. I've been watching Star Trek, puzzling over Star Trek since I was 5 years old. I've read hundreds of Star Trek books. I have every Star Trek reference book that's ever been. Somebody asked me, "Do you have the Klingon dictionary?" I do. Yes, I do. It's at all of these things are at arm's length. So for me, I would consider myself, if I was a scholar of anything besides stories or movies or television, Star Trek is one of those things that I'm a scholar of. And when I read these articles, I had it called up. I was reading Michael Chabon's an interview with Michael, however you pronounce his name. I don't actually have. I want to know. I want to know. It was a really interesting article, and he was really thoughtful, and even talks about, oh, wait a minute, I found it. So this was a Newsweek article. And I'm going to read this. This is a great Newsweek article, and it's a long article about Michael Chabon. And he, of course, became the showrunner of Picard. And the interviewer says about Michael Chabon, "You've spoken a lot about perspectives on the Star Trek utopia, often in response to people unhappy with the dark tone of Star Trek Picard. I've always thought of the Next Generation as this loosely socialist model for the future, but it struck me, thinking back on it, that it was less ideologically socialist, but instead reflected this belief that a future without want was an aspiration possible within the liberal capitalist framework of the 1990s, a proposition that is less believed and even less often assumed today. My question is, during the writing process, what are the axes that these discussions take place along? Are you discussing axes? Not axes. I think it was axes that they want to say. But what are the axes that these discussions are taking place along? Are you discussing in the room competing political ideologies or philosophies or current events? What are the modes of discussion that go into these writing decisions? This is Michael Chabon himself answering that question. We're always really trying hard to have the stories we are telling emerge plausibly, logically from previous continuity. because we are sitting around talking about this for day after day, week after week, month after month. In breaking this first season, we're looking at aspects of canon. I won't say that have not been looked at before, because that's almost certainly not the case, but looking at areas where a lot of fans may not have given a lot of thought necessarily. What do you mean we haven't given a lot of thought necessarily? I can tell you I certainly have, and I know a lot of other people that have too, but I'm going to go on. Take, for example, the use of currency in Star Trek, of money. Yes, we absolutely understand what has been more or less a given in Star Trek pretty much from the beginning, that there's no money in the Federation, and we come to understand much more fully on TNG that we live in the Federation and in a post-scarcity economy where there's essentially limitless energy, and therefore everything else becomes essentially free, whether that's food or housing or transport. So there's no more want, there's no more poverty, there's no more illness, and so forth. Yeah, that's obvious. We understand that. But consistently, if intermittently, throughout the history of the previous Star Treks, there is also constant reminders that if you don't live in the Federation, or if you live at the edges of the Federation, or just beyond the edges of the Federation, or if you make your living and ply your trade back and forth across the borders of the Federation and non-Federation states, then money is a big part of your life. It depends on the currency, whether it's the strips of pressed latinum that the Ferengi are so fond of, that they worship in fact, or whether it's the very mysterious credits that they begin to refer to in the original series that have never been fully examined or explained just exactly what Federation credits are. It seems pretty clear we are meant to understand that they are employed in transactions that take place outside the boundaries or back and forth across the boundaries of the Federation, which leads you to the question, well, if you live in the Federation and you need credits to go outside the Federation, how do you acquire them? Who gives them to you? What do they represent? Those are questions in canon that have never been answered. They've definitely been written about there, and there have been books published. So for us, that's just one aspect that for some fans and viewers who are knowledgeable and have been watching Star Trek a very long time, it gets their backs up right away. They say, wait a minute, why are all these people from the Federation talking about getting paid? And the answer is, well, look again. Look again and put on your canon hat and see that actually nobody who's talking that way is on a beautiful apartment building on Earth or Alpha Centauri or Vulcan or any other established part of the Federation. These are all people who are either on the other side or moving back and forth, and it is absolutely canonical for them to be looking at money in this way. Here's what I would say to that. To what Michael Chabon just said. He just said that when you're talking about credits, that fans, that viewers of the show get their backs up and say, wait a minute, why are all these people from the Federation talking about getting paid? They're saying that fans would say that. And I would say, here's the root problem of Star Trek. They assume that fans haven't thought about these things. They haven't. I've had long conversations throughout my life about this very thing. I mean, you want credits, I'll give them to you. I mean, Kirk actually tries to bribe Spock in Mirror Mirror with Federation credits. So anybody who thinks to themselves like, okay, well, within the Federation, obviously you don't need money because everything is provided for you, whatever. But that doesn't mean there's been money systems seen in Star Trek from the very beginning. You know, in the Gamesters of Triskelion, they're betting Quatlus. Disembodied brain entities are betting money, whatever that is. But Michael Chabon is saying, like, we're the only people that have ever decided or thought about this. I mean, wow. And to me, this is exactly where these people think, I want to say these people, right there, that we haven't, as fans, thought of these things. Like, he's basically flat out saying that, you know, in the writer's room, we're a lot smarter than the fan base that's been watching this show for 50 years. I know that's not exactly what he's saying, but fuck you. I mean, that's ridiculous. Then he says, I think it's kind of a long-winded answer, but everything we said and showed and did was talked about and thought through and weighed, and sometimes the answers, if we had a storytelling question, to get to an answer, we might look at canon. We might look at our own life experience and things that have happened to us that felt relevant or similar. We might look to a situation in the world we live in now for analogs, for certain situations that seem similar. So, for example, when we're looking at the example of traumatized ex-Borg and their lives and the way they are viewed by other nations, other species around them, or other political entities, we might look around at current analogs to that, whether that means looking at refugees or the way immigrants are treated at the U.S. border and the dehumanization and the efforts to depict them as subhuman or less than human or vermin, and then allow our real experience of something to help us write about it in a way that is actually true to what we know. Okay, I would ask Michael Chabon, after listening to that statement, where the fuck is that examination in your show? What do we know? Do we know anything about the XBs? All we know is that they're on this Borg cube. Have you actually talked to any of these XBs? We've seen Romulan XBs and a few other scattered XBs. You have an entire, what you just laid out was your 10-episode show of Picard. Why don't you look at the XBs and delve into that? We know nothing about them. By Michael Chabon's own account, right there, you've brought up 100 different questions about how these characters in this Borg cube are treated. We've seen none of that. We've seen none of that. We've seen the most rudimentary, one-dimensional depiction of what's actually going on in that artifact. We don't even really know. And apparently, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it really doesn't. Then Michael Chabon goes on and says, it's a combination of various elements, but always a question of what's been said in Star Trek before. How has this character been shown before? What haven't we seen of them before? Why haven't we seen that before? The canonicity of things, he says canonicity of things, is always first and foremost among the ways we look for answers to storytelling challenges. Is it? Is it really? Because Jean-Luc Picard lived an entire lifetime in the inner light where we know he was a father. He raised children. He has, in his own experience, he has what it means to be a father. He lived an entire life in that show. And the idea that he somehow doesn't know how to deal, like in Nepenthe, we see Riker and Troy. He knows more. Picard knows more about being a father because he's dealt with children that have grown up than Riker and Troy have, you know. And yet we have them give him a lecture about how do you talk to kids. I would say, Michael Chabon, where exactly the canonicity of things is always first and foremost amongst the ways we look for answers to storytelling challenges. Is it? Is it really? Because, you know, you showed me in episode 8 that you really don't understand Picard's character at all because that was 7. That was 7. Pardon me. Nepenthe is 7. Because you violated that. Because you just forgot conveniently that in the inner light, Picard lived decades where he raised children. Yes, it was a false memory implant, but to him, 50 years passed. And you don't take that into consideration. That's what's maddening about being a Star Trek fan. When I hear you say stuff like this, Michael Chabon, and then you're like, wow, who's in your writing room? Did they not bring up Inner Light? Did they not talk about one of the most significant episodes of Next Generation? Which, by the way, if you watch that episode as a science fiction concept, imagine you're put out for 15 minutes, but you've lived in your own mind what seems like 60 or 70 years. How does that affect you? Well, if you're a good science fiction writer, you could delve into that. But these people don't. And yet they pay it all lip service. So as a Star Trek fan, I'm like, why do I have to listen to your bullshit when you haven't done the research that you should to make the show interesting? Wouldn't Picard be more interesting if you dealt with the aftermath of that? No, the only thing they're dealing with is the aftermath of him being Locutus. I would dare say that what happened to him in the inner light was far more impactful to him as a man, as a person, as a human being, and we've never dealt with it. I mean, show us that. If you want to show us a story about a girl coming to him that's Data's child or whatever, the inner light should have been the episode that you could have referred to. Then you would have a really interesting show. But instead, nope. And that's what makes me angry, is I read this stuff and I think, man, and look, I know I'm imposing what I think is my own ideas about what is good and what isn't. But when I hear him talking about canon and how they're sitting there days and weeks and talking about canon, I'm like, well, you're not talking about it in a very interesting way then, because there's a lot of things that have happened in Next Generation that are far more interesting than what's being shown to us on this show. But okay. But yes, Swack and Shawn. Man, Dallas Lemon sent in a super chat and says, Picard, while alone on the bridge to the Klingons, that'll be the day. Now he sits in the chair and says, I don't know how to work this. Again, it's really insulting. It's really insulting. They've played that a lot. All the way back to the motion picture when Star Trek, when Admiral Kirk stops an ensign or a yeoman, he says turbo shaft 8. Back that way, sir. And Kirk doesn't know his way around the Enterprise. Now, I didn't really object to that because the Enterprise's internal configuration is totally different. Well, not totally different, but they've refitted the Enterprise, and in the context of that, you see that yes, there is things that Kirk doesn't know, and when you find out, you see Decker looking at Kirk when he has this exchange. It's exactly, Decker's right. You see that Decker's right and Kirk's wrong. That Kirk's position as a viewer, I'm like, I understand, I get that, really well done. But it makes sense. But in the case of what you're saying, Dallas, when you see Picard and he's I don't know how to work this. It's what they're doing is like, I don't know how to work these newfangled holographic displays. Like, I mean, come on, man. It's you. I don't believe. Maybe that's just me. That he would wind up being that kind of a character. This to me is Earth of today thinking. They haven't given me a character like Jean-Luc Picard in the 24th century. What would he be like? I don't believe that we've seen a realistic portrayal within the context of Star Trek of where Picard is. And people are always going, well, it's like this and it's like that. It's like how people were. No, because I have to go by Admiral McCoy. It was never said, but it was DeForest Kelley playing Admiral McCoy in the pilot of Star Trek The Next Generation. In Encounter at Farpoint has that great scene with Data to tie the two shows together. And McCoy is an admiral working. He's there to see off the Enterprise D, and he's like 138 years old. I mean, that was McCoy. And if you're going by anything, you have to go by, okay, Mr. Canonista, let's see, you've seen McCoy, he was shown being a certain way, and why not live up to that for the rest of the show? Why aren't you looking at Picard the way Admiral McCoy was treated, who's presumably almost 40 years older than Picard is in universe in the show Picard? Again, we've already seen these depictions of people that are still. That's why this idea that Picard is home in his chateau, to me, it's so not good science fiction, and it's so unimaginative, because what would a man like Jean-Luc Picard, why would he be back at his chateau, which, by the way, was never a place he ever wanted to be? He couldn't get out of there fast enough, and even when he went back up and made up with his brother Robert, he couldn't leave fast enough either. He didn't want to be stuck there. I mean, I just don't believe it. Picard would have been in the far-flung sections of the galaxy, but anyway, he was helping a refugee effort, and so he resigned from Starfleet and became anyway, I don't even know what I'm talking about. I just don't believe any way that Picard has been depicted. I don't believe he's ever behaved at all the way Jean-Luc Picard would behave. I believe that all the writers for Picard have imposed on him how that their real lives. I mean, Shaban says how my real life was. But you know what? I'm going to put this article in the live chat, and I want you guys all to read it, because everything that I object to about modern Star Trek is pretty much somewhere in here, in a way. I don't know if you're getting that. It says unable to connect to the chat. I don't know if you're going to get it. It does say that I cannot connect to this chat, which is too bad. Maybe that's a function of what happened. I'll try it again, but yeah. I might not even be talking to you. I assume I'm still talking to you. I have no idea because the live chat is out. Maybe I'm talking to nobody. Who knows? I don't know. Well, anyway, let me tell you, it's Newsweek. If you can't get this, it was published on March 5th at 1:47, and here's the headline. It's Newsweek. How Picard showrunner Michael Chabon honored Star Trek's past while writing its difficult future. Yeah, well, okay. Anyway, there you go. What an interesting chat this has been. I am so far from what I was talking about in the beginning. I want to thank everybody for writing it. I also want to thank Shawn Pollan for writing an interesting letter. And I like having these kinds of conversations. And yes, Shawn, I do think that we would definitely enjoy, if you live in California, we should. I mean, you can't go to a bar, but when they reopen, come over to the Robservatory, bring some whiskey. I just bought myself a great Baby Yoda Jameson t-shirt. Whenever that comes in, who knows? I mean, hell, of course we have to be socially distanced, but there you go. Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to run off to a shoot. I'm going to assist John Campea, and we're doing I'm going to do an interview with him. Oh, wait, Claudia sends in a tip. Claudia says, here we are, folks. The dream we all dream of. Laugh out loud, Watu. That's the Watcher. Maybe it took this pandemic to demonstrate to Michael Chabon why Starfleet was cool. The original series Starfleet showcased professional exceptionalism in scientific exploration and defense. Dystopianism is so 90s. Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right, Claudius. By the way, you know what? Let me just as a plug, obviously Elizabeth and I did our second Whining About Movies last night. Wednesday on Whining About Movies, Elizabeth has never seen Donnie Darko. So Donnie Darko is the movie that we're going to see. I'm going to show it to her tonight. I haven't decided. I have the beautiful Arrow box set for Donnie Darko. I don't know whether I'm going to show her the original theatrical version or the director's cut. Donnie Darko is interesting in that I don't necessarily, my default position is not the director's cut necessarily. I can't decide what I should show her. But Claudius reminds me that she's never seen I, Claudius, which is one of my favorite things that's ever appeared on television. And Patrick Stewart was in that. He played Sejanus. And I love I, Claudius. But yeah, I mean, what I've always talked about is, first and foremost, Star Trek was always about the best people. Even when you met officers that were part of the Maquis in Voyager, these were all people that were really good at their jobs. And I understand, yes, Barclay was also dealt with and shown. I mean, Barclay was the one non-exceptional person, but he was still there, so he had to excel in something. But that's one of the things that I've always liked about the Star Trek universe is you've always seen people that are really good at their jobs, And I think that's one of the appeals. It's part of the optimism of the show. You're showing the best of the best, and that's what's fun to watch. It's interesting to look. I feel that Picard, what I'm watching now, is kind of like the episodes Gambit Part 1 and 2, which was a kind of a space pirate. Picard goes undercover as vaguely a space pirate, and there's, instead of Romulan intelligence officers, there's Vulcan intelligence officers. I mean, Robin Curtis comes back and plays one. I feel like we're getting that. We're getting this extended episode of TNG that just, I feel like we're getting Gambit mixed with Descent Parts 1 and 2. And I don't know if any of you remember when it was first broadcast, but Descent Part 1 and 2 ultimately turned out to be rather disappointing, especially considering we had Q-Who, Best of Both Worlds 1 and 2, and I, Borg. And then we ended up getting Descent Part 1 and 2. I feel like we're getting a combination of Descent and Gambit, and then with Patrick Stewart's, I mean, again, the Alison Pill character. How do you get away with murder? And everybody's like, oh, I'm sorry, I killed somebody. I still don't understand. Why did Alison Pill kill Bruce Maddox? I mean, was she brainwashed to do so? The images that the Zot Vosh I keep saying Sandra Oh, that Commodore O put into her head was what drove her to murder? Why would learning truth, I mean, when you're watching images of the apocalypse or something, I mean, I've watched Terminator 2 Judgment Day, but it didn't traumatize me so much that I guess if a race drags 8 planets to create, or 8 stars and a planet to create a beacon for the rest of the galaxy to understand, like, this is the danger of synthetic life, wouldn't you want everyone to know that? Clearly, they weren't trying to keep it a secret. They were trying to be as ostentatious as possible, so everybody would come in and be like, hey, everyone, here's the dangers of synthetic life. We're going to show you right now. We're going to make... And then why would they make the message so difficult to comprehend? Why would they want, if they're trying to give you this warning, why would they make it so deadly? Why would they make it so difficult? And why would the Zot Vosh not share it with everyone? Again, I don't understand. If this is a warning to all humanoid life that synthetic life is bad, and also they have said, like, reaching a warp threshold, is this race going to show up then? And if you've got synthetic life, if you've reached a certain threshold, then I would think that, like with Battlestar Galactica, with the Cylons, this is another problem I have with the Cylons. If you can procreate with a Cylon, which you clearly can, then Cylons are alive. They're no longer, if that's happening and people are being, if you have half Cylon, half human babies, I would say the question as to whether or not Cylons are synthetic life or not anymore. So, anyway, just something to think about. But I'm going to bring an end to this chat. Again, I have no idea whether people are here or not. I just assume so because I'm cut off from the live chat. I haven't seen what everybody's doing. But I want to thank everybody for being here. Again, I will be on the John Campea show tomorrow, and we will be back with another episode of Whining About the Movies, Donnie Darko tomorrow. Elizabeth has never seen Donnie Darko. That's what we are going to watch. So join us at 8 o'clock Wednesday night. But first and foremost, I want to thank the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank Jordy Lyons and Louis Yu for being great moderators and being here. But most of all, I want to thank all of you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, who make this all possible, who make this community what it is. Remember, you can go talk to the Richard, who administers the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. Go over there. You can always find me on Twitter, social media, Instagram, whatever. Write me letters like Shawn did. Send me DMs. I leave my DMs open. Sometimes it takes me a while to get to them because if we don't follow each other, I don't see them right away. But I do leave my DMs open. And also you can send a letter to the Burnettwork.net website, which is right down there. You can see that. And yeah. So, gosh, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Is Wonder Woman next on the chopping block? Is Wonder Woman 84 going away? She's not going to be named Rio, and she won't dance on the sand. I'm very sad. Actually, Rio came out in 82. Arena came out in 84 with the Wild Boys. The Wild Boys are calling. So, yes, I shouldn't say that. If I'm to make Duran Duran references, I have to get my dates correct. But, yes, so who knows what's going to happen now? I don't know. All I do know is that the 10th episode of the season 2 of Manifest aired, and it's on Hulu, and I haven't seen it yet. So, oh boy. It's very funny. I watch Picard, I expect so much of it, and then I also watch Manifest, and I expect so little from it, which is why I'm delighted by it, because it never ceases to disappoint me. I mean, not disappoint me, because of its craziness. But anyway, I'm going to be signing off. This is the end of Robservations, episode number 364. And I will say to you, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I assume with this weird internet interruption where everything just dropped out for a moment, hopefully it won't happen again. But hopefully you've heard the rest of this stream. I would assume so, since people sent in tips and super chats. So thank you for that. I will say this. With all the craziness that's going on, remember, as I like to say from Terminator, in 100 years, who's going to care? No, I'm just kidding. Everybody stay safe. things are not all bad. They're not bad. As a matter of fact, read Yuval Harari's book Sapiens. Sapiens. It'll make you feel good about being a human being. It's good, and I highly recommend it. It's a hugely entertaining read, and so is it's not really the sequel, I guess. The second part of it, Homo Deus. So Yuval Harari's book Sapiens and Homo Deus, in this time, if you're sequestered away and you're looking for something compelling to read, basically the first book deals with the history of humanity up through now, and it ends on a positive note, and then Homo Deus goes into the future and asks where we're going. And one of the things that I still ponder all the time is at the end of his book, it's not a spoiler alert because you'll get there and you'll ponder this too, Yuval Harari asks, what do we as a species, what does mankind, what is humankind? I know someone's going to, saying mankind is somehow it's offensive. I find it offensive because it's gender specific, whatever. I understand. I get it. I feel you. But the book asks at the end, what is it we want? What is it we want? What does humanity want as a species? What do we want moving forward? I don't think we know what we want, but what was interesting is seeing this I look at this, the global response to this pandemic has actually, I think, been one of the most uplifting things that I've experienced. Certainly since Trump has been president, the world is coming together. The world has proven that if they need to do something quickly, everybody can sort of be on the same page. I mean, sure, they're not quite on the same page, but for the most part, pretty interesting, pretty impressive display of the world coming together. And I don't know if I've ever seen this before in my lifetime, but I definitely choose to look at it as a positive thing. I really do. I think, and maybe look, I'm a Star Trek fan my whole life. I'm an eternal optimist. I believe in humanity's ability to rise above. And I think we're seeing it. It's going to be interesting to see how it holds, what goes on. I mean, I think in America and other places, the hoarding of toilet paper, look, if we all had food poisoning, I'd get it. But I think ultimately all of this and the response and what people have done and how they've handled it, it's been pretty uplifting. At least that's the way I choose to look at it. So anyway, on that note, I would say to all of you, have a better day. And I mean that.